Hey everybody, welcome to another FlutterFlow video, and in this one we're going to look at some of my personal kind of tips on using FlutterFlow on a day-to-day basis. Some of the stuff I might have covered in previous videos, but I kind of brought it together in this particular one. Hopefully you'll learn something in here depending on your skill levels with inside FlutterFlow. So without further ado, let's get into the video and let's get cracking. So one thing that's really important with inside my applications is that I try to be consistent with item spacing, and I don't try to apply lots of padding to my widgets, you know, top, bottom, left and right, because that can be quite a draw on your time. So what I suggest that you do is I've got like a column here. You can see it contains all of these kind of widgets here, and what I've not done is I've not gone into each of these widgets and I've applied padding to the top and the bottom. I've gone to the column here, I've used item spacing here to my advantage. Of course I could then change this to 24, or I could change this maybe to 8, and of course all of my widgets therefore then get adjusted, and I don't need to go into each of these widgets and then set the padding on the top and the bottom. The only padding that I've actually got in here is on that column to bring off the edge from both sides there as well. So please do get consistent with that. Use the power of the actual columns and the item spacing here to your advantage. So one other little thing I like to do is work in increments of 4, so 4, 8, 16. That's how I like to apply certainly to then my paddings and to my spacing with inside my UI, just to really just hone in on that consistency. So one thing that I like to do with inside my applications is actually properly name my widgets, and you can see here on the left hand side I've kind of named the widgets with kind of a name of the actual widget and then the actual type that it actually is. And one thing that's really important about this is that when you then actually come to then reference those widgets, for example when you're trying to trigger a widget animation, you can easily see which one you are selecting. Let's have a look. So if I scroll down here with inside the widget tree, you can see that I've got this submit icon mouse region, which is currently the parent of my submit icon button. Now I want to animate that a particular icon button, so I've added a trigger animation to the submit icon button, but of course I want to trigger that. So if I click on the actual submit icon region, if I add the action and I just do a search in here for anim, for animation, and choose widget animation, you can see now that I can choose which animation I want to trigger. Now because I've named my widgets correctly, if I select that, you can see now that I can see by reference which ones that I'm interested in. So of course you can have text if you do not rename your widget, but of course here you can see the one that I'm interested in is called submit icon button, so it's just easy reference. So of course I can now go into the action flow editor, go on the mouse exit, if I paste the animation in there, select that, and I can actually then just simply then reverse the animation. If I look at that in test mode, you can see now that when I hover my mouse over here, you can see that I can now see that animation playing out on my button. So of course the demo that I've actually been showing here is the IT support system. There is a video on my channel which shows you how to actually build this, so do go and check that out. So here's a new one that's just recently popped into FlutterFlow. You can now copy and paste your backend queries. So you can see here I've got this one called next appointment. You can see it has a backend query, so I've got the little icon that is showing it. Now if I go up here, you can now see I've got these options of actually cutting and copying. So what I can now do is I can select the copy here. I can then go up maybe to then another row. I can go to the backend and I can then wonderfully paste that with inside here as well. Now of course my UI is going to break here, but certainly that is now a time saver, because generally what will happen is when you're actually editing these backend queries, they can become quite complex with lots of filtering and lots of ordering and all that kind of stuff. So that's definitely a time saver for me, so I hope you find that one useful. So if you're not using themed style widgets with inside your FlutterFlow application, then what are you waiting for? You need to do it early with inside your project, because it will save you so much time later. Let me give you a quick example. Here we've got a kind of like a component which is showing some booking details. You can see here I've got this app date calendar icon button. Now I like the style of this. I want to reuse this throughout my application, and what's really important here is that when I then make a change in one place, I want that reflected right the way through my user interface. So how does that work? Well, all you need to do is right click and then say save as theme style widget. So just choose that. Now I'm just going to call this one icon button, and I'm going to call it primary like that. Hit create style. Okay, that's now persisted with inside FlutterFlow. Now what I can do now, if I'm up, say for example in this particular row here, and I actually now add in another icon button, if I just do a search here for icon button like that, So let's just choose that here. What I can then do is I can then go up to the theme style widget, and I can then choose the icon primary button. You can see here now the style of it is now reflected. Everything like the color and everything like that. Of course, that borders and all that kind of stuff, then it would be applied as well. And the great thing about it is that now that I've actually got that selected, it's now part of my widget styling here. I've got it selected here. So of course I can now then go into then the theme widgets. I can then see it now listed here, select this, and of course I can then make changes to this. So for example, let's change the color. So let's change this now to maybe, let's do the tertiary color here. Now if I save and go back to the widget tree, you can now see that the actual color has now been applied now to both the actual widgets that are inheriting this widget styling. So certainly I recommend that as you are getting confident about the look and feel of your user interface, you start to then get these styles applied to your widgets, and then you can just carry on reusing that then throughout your user interface. So one thing that's really important with inside your UI is to think reuse, reuse, reuse. And you can see here I've got a great example where we've got 3 containers on my screen here that are very, very similar. We've got the book appointment, have a question, and email us. Now the only thing that's distinctively different is obviously the color, the icon, the title, and the description. But what I want to do is I want to promote good reusability within inside my application. Instead of just kind of copying this and then pasting this within inside a column and give it sort of additional kind of widget entries within inside the widget tree, let's convert it to component. It's the best way to go. So I'm going to right click on this here, click on convert to component. Let's give the component a name. So call out component, hit create component. Now what I need to do is I need to go to my component parameters up here, and I now need to define all of the input parameters. Now this can be the title, the description, and the icon in the color. Let me quickly do that. So we go, all the parameters are created, hit confirm, and you'll see these just at the top here. Now what I need to do is now I need to map each of these obviously to each of those ones that I've now added. So let's just choose title. So choose the selector here, click on the actual icon itself, that's passed in, that's nice. And then of course it's just now the actual panel itself. So with the fill color, choose the actual background color. So they are now all mapped. Let's just rename that particular container here. Call out container like that, make it a little bit more generic. So we are now good to go. So I can now go over to the home page now, and I can now start populating these values. Just select the actual component itself. You can see here it's now converted to a component within inside my widget tree, and I can now start putting the details in that I had before. So there we go. So all of the details have all been filled in. You can see I'm right back to where I was. Of course, I can now delete these ones out, and I can just duplicate that, and I can then fill in those details, which means that then just promotes good reusability across my FlutterFlow application. So the big recommendation is to test frequently within inside FlutterFlow itself, within inside the browser. But of course, you've got another tool that's available to you if you have an Android device, and that is the FlutterFlow preview app. If you want to get a general kind of idea, kind of how your application is kind of sort of firing up on a mobile device, then basically all you need to do is kind of do a run mode execution within inside FlutterFlow. You can then view your application within inside the preview app. So just give you a good sense to how it's kind of playing out on an actual device. So I don't think it's available for Apple, but certainly if you've got an Android device, go and download that now, and then you can test to your heart's content. So fully then embrace a good folder structure within inside your FlutterFlow application project. You can see here that I kind of got pages all in the relevant pages folder. I've got this other folder called components. You can see I've got this kind of like sub folder here where it's got common, and that's where I kind of put the more sort of the shared components that I'm going to sort of have across the whole of my application. And then here, of course, is I've got a dedicated set of components, kind of one-time kind of components, maybe bottom bars and all that kind of stuff that I kind of just keep within inside this particular folder. And of course, you can create folders within folders, and you can really kind of sort of position everything in the hierarchy within inside your project. But that's how I like to do my project setups, and it's certainly by doing that it keeps everything all in order, and your housekeeping right off the bat should be fully in check. So if you've not used action blocks yet within inside your FlutterFlow application, what are you waiting for? They're different to the actions themselves, because an action block allows you to create a series of actions that you can then invoke, whether at page level or at the application level across your application. Now, again, that promotes really, really good reusability. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a really, really simple example of an action block, and something you might want to also adopt is, let's say, for example, you are continually displaying information information dialog boxes on the actual screen. Now, of course, you could add those actions, of course, in any of the action flows that you actually create for your project. That's fine, but let's do it in one place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose a little submit icon button here. I'm going to go to the actions. You can see here I've got this option called action blocks. Just select that, and I've got two different options. I've got one at app level and at page level. Now, app level means that action block can be invoked from anywhere within inside your application. Obviously, page level, as it sounds, can only be invoked from the page it's on. So let's choose app level here. Let's click on the create action block. Let's give it a name. So I'm going to say this one should be, I'm just going to call this one show dialog. Hit create, and here we are. We're just in the typical display you would actually have if you was putting together a series of actions elsewhere. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create an action here. Just choose add action. I'm going to do as I would do before. Let's just show an alert dialog box, choose information dialog box, and of course I can give it titles and all that kind of stuff. Now, the great thing about this actual action block is if I just click away here, I can actually define input parameters. So what I can do is I can just do one called, say, title here, which is a string, and I'm going to say it's required, and I'm going to do one here called description, just like that, and say it's required. I'm just going to keep this a really simple example. I'm not going to return any values because action blocks can actually return values back to the call-in action. I'm just going to keep it like that. Just hit the actual dialog here, and I'm now going to sort of connect these up, of course, to the action parameters. So that's the title, and then that is the actual description as well. So that's good. So I'm just going to keep it quite simply like that. Hit close. Now, what that now means is that if I now go into the action flow of this particular button here, so if I go to the action flow editor, here is the API call. So let's say, for example, that the API call fails. I get like a 400, a bad request or something like that back from the API call. If I hit the little plus here and I go to add action, you can see just down the bottom here, I've got this action block that's now available to me, the show dialog. So I could just click that and I can then pass in these parameters. So the title, I'm just going to say, error, something like that. And then I'm going to pass in another one, hit the description, and I'm just going to say there has been a problem like that. So what will actually happen now is that when an actual error comes up, that dialog will then be displayed. So the great thing about that, that's great, and it's all in one place, and of course you could do that through any of these actions manually. But the beauty of it, of course, is if I ever need to actually then customize that action block, I only have to do it in one place and not throughout the whole of my application. So you can see now that the action block is there, show dialog. Now, the great thing about this, of course, is then in the future, if I ever want to then make a change to this particular action block. So for example, let's say I might want to call out to an API where it provides some logging or something like that. I only need to do that in one place within inside my application. Of course, it'll then be right across the board for all of the invoking actions into this particular action block. So FlutterFlow is a very comprehensive tool, of course. Now, there's a couple of little tips I'd like to also share with you that if you're a newcomer to FlutterFlow, you may not be using them at this moment in time. So remember, you've got the Apple K, Control K, which will bring up the command palette, makes it super easy for you to kind of navigate your project and do some amazing things. So for example, let's say I want to quickly jump to my notes page here. I just type in notes and then I can hit enter there, say to be clicking about. And of course, I might just want to actually go to the, the theme settings. I can quickly do that and I'm in there. So of course, in my videos, I tend to walk through more point and click. But of course, remember, when you become a power user, these are the type of productivity boosts that you can have to speed up your workflow. So if you haven't downloaded the iPad version of FlutterFlow, what are you waiting for? This is a fantastic time saver. I tend to use the application for doing all of my design work while I'm away from my computer, and of course I can then come back and resume everything I need to do with inside my actual workstation. I've built many projects now using the iPad version of FlutterFlow, pretty almost to like 95% of what I actually need. So do go and check out this app. So this little command palette that sits up here is a really important one actually during your day-to-day FlutterFlow development. The first one here is the light and dark mode. I mean, it's so obvious, but actually if you really just need to quickly check to see how your UI is playing out with your light and dark mode themes, then just toggling that on and off. This next one is quite important as well actually, because as I mentioned previously in the video regarding the actual safe area, of course if you weren't using the safe area toggle, you can kind of see how your UI is likely to respond when you've kind of got this whopping great camera notch that kind of sits at the top of your device. So that's a good little test. The next one is obviously the keyboard as well. I always recommend that actually during your day-to-day sort of work and creating of your pages, you do check to see how your UI will respond to the keyboard being displayed. You want to make sure you're not hiding anything that you shouldn't be here. And as you can see here, the navigation is sort of just sitting above. And of course, there's other techniques in FlutterFlow as well that actually, if you have the on-screen keyboard displayed, you can kind of hide and you can show widgets as well. The other accessibility one is this one here, is the adjust text scale. Now, of course, the different users will have different preferences set on their phone in terms of their actual scale of the actual text. So I highly recommend that you periodically are checking your text scale as you are creating your UIs. So just a couple of little bits there on that particular command palette. So there we go then, some of my favorite little productivity tips and some of the bits that I do as well in my own projects. I hope you found that useful depending on any particular skill level that you actually have with inside FlutterFlow. Please, of course, like the video, really do appreciate that, and please do subscribe to the channel. If you love Nocode and you love FlutterFlow in particular, then there's so much more on my channel, and there's also so much more to come in the not too distant future. So until the next video, I'll see you soon.